Hello, everybody. Welcome to Introduction to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, or the FAR. Have a little agenda. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and who we are as Small Business Development Center. What you're going to learn in this presentation, we'll look at the Code of Federal Regulations, acquisition.gov, and contact information. And like I say, we'll take questions at the end of the presentation. So a little bit about myself. I've worked with various government contractors since 1990. I teach government contracting, pricing, financing, and management courses at a local university. And then prior to working with government contractors, I worked in a commercial bank. Now, who we are, we're a resource partner for the Small Business Administration. We have 21 centers across the state. We offer individual, confidential, no-cost consulting to our clients. Now, we're highly trained consultants, so we exist. Doesn't matter if you're a startup company, you're existing, we're here to help. And in some of our areas, we help folks with business plans, their fiscal and operation management, financing options, look at marketing strategies, human resources, and many more. So our centers, we conduct education workshops and provide referrals for useful business resources. And we have also specialized services for exporting, technology commercialization, veteran business assistance, and minority outreach and government contracting. So in this presentation, you're going to identify the basic background information pertaining to the FAR, the agency regulations, the procedures, the guidance, and information, and the FAR agency level class deviations. So also to recognize the organization and the arrangement of agency FAR supplements, as well as apply the conventions for interpreting the FAR. So why is this important? So if you're a prime contractor, you need to know what you're getting into, what the contract's saying, what all of these clauses mean. And subcontractors need to know what they have to take as flow downs. So knowledge is power. Now, relation to the statutes. The statutes remain law of the land, but the FAR is designed to implement those statutes. The FAR brings the statutes to a working level and has the enforcement effect of law. Now, I want to put a little disclosure. I'm not an attorney, so we don't give any legal advice, but I just want to go make that clear. The FAR has been in effect since April 1st, 1984, and it has all the lessons learned by the government over the last 200 plus years. So there's some myths that go along it. Some folks say government personnel, particularly contract officers, know the FAR by heart, and certainly better than I do. And that's not true. Some contract officers are more experienced than others. They take extensive courses learning the FAR before they get issued what's called a warrant, where they could bound the federal government into certain contracts. Now, the FAR can only be used as an offensive weapon by the government. No, they're not true. The FAR is useful for the government and as well as contractors. It's the playing field. It's the rules. So I'm a subcontractor, so I have a lot less exposure to the FAR. That's not true as well. You know, you're everybody who, whether you're a subcontractor, you're a joint venture, whatever the case may be, you're all governed by the rules of the Federal Acquisition Regulation. Now, the FAR is issued and maintained jointly under the statutory authority granted to the Secretary of Defense, the Administrator of the GSA, General Service Administration, and the NASA Administrator. The statutory authority to issue and revise the FAR has been delegated to procurement executives in those agencies. And the Office of Procurement Policy, OFPP, provides the overall direction for government-wide procurement policies and regulations and procedures. Now, the Federal Acquisition Regulation Council, they manage, they coordinate, control, monitor the maintenance, and issue changes of the FAR. Now, any revisions to the FAR are issued through the Federal Acquisition Circular once they have gone through the Federal Register process by the Administrative Procedure Act, APA. Now, the FAR organizational system that applies to the FAR and all agency supplements, you'll find that in what's called FAR 1.303. And we'll look at that numbering system in a bit here. Under the FAR numbering system, the digits to the left of the decimal, they represent the part number. The digits to the right of the decimal and to the left of the dash represents a subpart and section. And anything to the right of the dash is a subsection. So here's an example. This is FAR 15.403.01. So if we look at that, we say, okay, well, FAR 15, we know that's the FAR part. And 15.4, that's the FAR subpart. Now, to the right of the decimal is that section. So 15.403, and then anything beyond that hyphen is the subsection. Now, the FAR subpart 52.2, that's the text of all the provisions and the clauses that contains all the clause and all those provisions. And every one of them, they begin with 52.2. Now, the next two digits correspond to the FAR part in which that particular clause or provision is discussed and prescribed. So the number following the hyphen relates to the number of clauses and provisions related to that FAR part. Now, if we look at those hyphen, it relates to the number of clauses related to the FAR part. For example, FAR 52.243-1. That is for changes on fixed price contracts. That's the first clause drafted to deal with the changes. And there's a matrix. Each clause or provision listed in the FAR cross-references the FAR section. And we'll look at that matrix in part of the presentation. It prescribes when it should or may be included in a contract. The FAR matrix and FAR subpart 52.3, that's provisions and clause matrix, summarizes those prescriptions. Now, supplements. Agency FAR supplements, it further implements something that's already covered in FAR, but must be numbered to correspond to the appropriate FAR. For example, FAR Part 27, patents, data, and copyrights, is supplemented by the DoD FAR Supplement 227, patent, data, and copyrights. You'll see when you look at this, the FAR, it's in the Code of Federal Regulation. It's 48-1. And within those, it has certain ones. The first one, the FAR system, relates to the FAR. The second one's DoD. And there's 50 titles altogether out there. The Air Force supplement is the Air Force Part 5127. So 51 is the Air Force and the patents, data, and copyrights. Now, these supplements that supplement the FAR, they discuss something that's not addressed in the FAR. and they must utilize the number 70 and up. For example, the Department of the Interior, their assigned number is in Title 48 is 14. So they would use 14, part 1470. Their subpart would be 1401.70, section 1401.370, or subsection as 1401.301.70. And this is all referenced in the FAR 1.303-A. So when you're looking at the basic principle of working with the FAR, you want to make sure that you're working with the right regulation and copy of your regulation is current. Some folks prefer to get a hard copy of that FAR, about 2,300 pages, but there's an electronic version. You always want to make sure that you're up to date. The regulation in effect on the date of your contract was awarded will always govern the contract unless the parties agree otherwise. And that's listed in FAR 1.108D. Now, the FAR, it doesn't cover all federal agencies. For example, the FAA and it's not USOS, I made an error, it's the United States Post Office. They have their own regulation. Now, they're trying to ascertain the relationship with the FAR's prescriptions with the standard clauses. And that will give you an idea of whether the clause should be in the contract. Now, if that FAR language is not clear on its face, you want to check to see if there's any case law that explains or applies the language. So it gets a little bit more complicated. So some folks, they either have an in-house legal department that's looking at these things, or they're finding somebody that's helping them out, or they have a contract manager or administrator that's helping along. So if you have questions, you want to ask somebody you should know. And you could always get with me and I can explain them. Now you want to check the table of contents and topical index. And you don't want to ever assume that you know the FAR by heart. I don't. I use the electronic version every day when I'm looking up something. So even though I've used it for a long time, it's ever changing. It's an evolutionary document, and so it changes every day. You'll see one change in another slide that just happened a week ago. So it's written broadly and generically, and the changes depending on the facts that are applied to it. Now the terms. The world of government contracting, they use terms, they have a common meaning in everyday life, but a special meaning when you're dealing with government contracts. For example, they include termination. It might be terminating, ending. There might be termination for cause in contract, discussions, changes. So to understand the full meaning of those words, you would start by checking to see if they're defined in the FAR. And most of those terms are defined in FAR Part 2. So if a word or phrase is in FAR Part 2, the definition applies throughout the FAR. And you'll see that in FAR 2.101A. Unless the context is which a word or term is used clearly requires a different meaning. So if you have a word or phrase that's defined in another FAR part, then that particular definition only applies to that part. Now, undefined words retain their common dictionary meaning. You'll see that again, FAR 1.108A. Some terms are derived from case law. So, for example, the doctrine of course of conduct, that's from case law. You're not going to find that in the statutes or the FAR. Same is true for meaningful discussions. One of the most important words in FAR is shall. FAR Part 2 states that shall and must mean imperative. They're necessary or required. Now, in that same FAR Part 2, it states that may denotes the permissive or It's an optional. Now, if you're a prime contractor, you want to stay on top of those changes in the FAR. I know when you signed up to be a contractor, first you had to go on SAM.gov, System of Award Management, and there's one section that applied to all the FAR clauses. As you said, you read through and understand that, but you want to stay on top of any changes at the FAR. And if you found a contract, it's a request for proposal, that RFP. You want to review that, make sure it has the right clause in it. If you have any concerns about what's in it or not in the RFP, you want to communicate with the contracting officer in writing as soon as possible, and certainly before the offers are due, and be prepared to tie your position to the FAR. Sometimes you'll get RFPs, and again, it depends on how experienced the contract officer is that's putting this together. Some you might say are using boilerplates. I've looked at some RFPs and started looking at the FAR clauses or any other clause, and it just doesn't make too much sense. And immediately you have to contact the contract officer and say, hey, what's going on here? And also you could use the prime contract once awarded to, prepare your subcontracts, whoever's on your team. But you want to watch out for local clauses in solicitation. Beware of any boilerplate. And don't use one-size-fits-all approach to drafting your subcontracts. There might be specific situations. And for the subcontractors, you want to review a proposed subcontract carefully. You want to ensure that you could live with the terms. And again, you want to prepare, that's not a boilerplate that the prime has just sent you, said, hey, we put these in all theirs. They might not apply here. So you want to know what the contract's stating. You want to make sure separately if there's any flow downs. Does it affect? Are you tied to that certain FAR clause, or is it just for the prime and it's not affecting you? That's one of the reasons you got to keep abreast of this. Keep practicing, and you got to keep practicing and try to add it every day. I want to check for alter clauses. If you're aware that a clause is not mandatory flow down, you want to make a decision as to whether and how to challenge it. Going back to the prime here and say, hey, according to this contract, this flow down that you're trying to put on me doesn't have any bearing. So your knowledge of the FAR is vital in making any of those challenges. Now, solving a problem. First, you want to make sure you have all the facts. Until those are established, the next step is a waste of time. You want to ask yourself two questions. What does the contract say? What do the regulations say? Maybe majority of the time, 80% plus, it's already in the contract. And you say, well, you might not like the answer, but it's something you signed up to. And same with the regulations. You want to make sure you have the entire contract and the right regulations when you're challenging this, trying to solve a problem. So the FAR, that's going to be here to stay. It's a constant thing that keeps on going. So you and your team have to be familiar with it. So the knowledge of your FAR is the key to success. It doesn't matter what your position is. It's the rules that the government goes by, and it's the rules that everybody doing business with government needs to play by. These come through. There's a Code of Federal Regulations. Now this one, it codification of the general and permanent regulations that's published in the Federal Register. Like I say, these ones have 50 titles. The FAR is the first one, then has DOD and so on. FAR is 48-1. Now, it represents broad areas and is subject to federal regulation. Now, like I say, the Title 48 of those 50 is the Federal Acquisition Regulation System. That's including the FAR and everybody else in that system. And you say it was last amended on July 7th of this year. And you could go on here. I put in a link to the Code of Federal Regulations, so you could go to that as well. You'll see that at the end. And when you click on that, the first one, so let's say, okay, here's Title 48, Federal Acquisition Regulation. And you see on this one, we go into Chapter 1, and that in this, and then we go, the next one is with DOD. Then you have Health and Human Services. So what these other ones are doing, they are like the FAR, but sometimes they have a little extra to these. So the early example we saw, FAR 27, it related to the DOD 2227. Now, if you break the Title 48 in Chapter 1, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, you'll see that there's 8 chapters, A through H, and there's a Part 1 through 53 on this one. So Part 1 is talking about the Federal Acquisition System, the definition words that we're talking about a lot here. Part 3 is improper business practices. So when you look at those, it boils down and it tells you everything. It gets a deeper dive into it. So you see, Part 13 is the simplified acquisition procedures. You have a sealed bidding, the contract negotiation, the different types of contracts. It could be you're working with an IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. Within that one, you have that contract vehicle, which is allowing you to bid on other contracts. It might be in a cost plus fixed fee type thing, cost plus award fee, cost plus share fee, might be time material contract. It might be a fixed price contract. So there's different things that go along here. 52 we talked about earlier. That was the solicitation provisions and contract clauses. And 53 are the various forms. Now, the first one in the Federal Acquisition Regulation System was the FAR. Then, like I say, 2 through 15, and there's more. It goes through each one of those agencies as their own. And one of the things I usually like to go to is it's called acquisition.gov. Acquisition.gov, it's going to show you all the regulations for the ones that are listed here. So the first one is the FAR. And then you have the Navy and Marine Corps Acquisition Regulation Supplement, Department of State regulation, Housing and Urban Development. So they're all laid down there. And you go to the individual ones in case you're working on Veterans Affairs. Maybe you are working with the Department of the Air Force. Now in acquisition.gov, when you go to that one, you're going to see the different FAR parts over here. You could get on, we were talking earlier about the DOD deviations. We'll look at them as well. And it's going to lay out like this one is home, regulations, the FAR Part 1, that's the Federal Acquisition System. And so I have a link to that as well that you could use. Now for this one, I'm not the only one that does this in our state here. There's 2 others that are helping out. Sherry Pittenger, she's in the upper state area in Greenville. So here's her contact information. You have Scott Bellows, he's in the Midlands area, up and around Columbia. And then myself, I'm in the Low Country area in Charleston and different ones here. Now, these are the useful sites you go. The first one is that acquisition.gov, and that one's a layout of all these. And the second one is the electronic code of federal regulations. So you go to that one as well. So just want to open it up if you have any questions for me. Let's see, let me go back here. If you have any questions, you could either, we could do them right now, or we could go and you can call me or email me and we could take a bigger dive in these. And like I say, if you're just getting started into this one, it could be a little bit daunting. But the main thing is to revisit those things, learn about them. When you signed on to SAM.gov, revisit those FAR clauses that you said that you read and understood those, because you're signing up for these things. If you win a contract, those everything that was on the RFP, for example, will be on that contract, and you are bound by those. So, and also any subcontracts you have. And then, like we were talking earlier, if you're prime, you need to know this. If you're a subcontractor, you need to know this, because all the clauses don't flow through to the subcontractors.